Oh, Eric, it is so awesome to have you here with me today. I've been enjoying your work, both literary and musical, for quite some time. And I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners. For those of you who have not had the pleasure of listening or reading Eric, he is someone whose life and work embody the beauty of living unfixed and sort of embracing the mystery, the transformation, and all the rich intersections of a multi-dimensional life. He's a storyteller, a musician, a world traveler, a father, a fiduciary, a farmhand, and also 2 decades of an executive as an executive in commercial banking. So I would think it's safe to say that your journey, Eric, doesn't fit neatly into a tiny box. And so we're going to dive into all of this today, especially focusing on, well, a few different things, but his debut novel, Coincidence Speaks, is just a powerful exploration of synchronicity and the character, Paul Endrum, that is loosely based on his own life, or maybe not so loosely. And we're going to just explore his leaps of faith and the transformative power of serendipity and how you stay grounded while living in the unknown, because I think you have a lot of unknowns going on. So I'm going to stop talking so we can hear from you. Eric, welcome.
Wow, Kimberly, thank you. Thank you so much.
I've got some questions for you today. And we're going to just dive in first into your book, because I feel like this is, first of all, I love that I didn't know this, but your character, the main character in Coincidence Speaks, is Paul Endrum, which you just told me is a palindrome, or a play on the word palindrome, which is just perfect because, as you said, it's like a nod towards the ability to read time both forwards and backwards. So tell me, what was this process like writing Coincidence Speaks, and how did that clarify some of your own inner journey?
Wow. Yeah, writing Coincidence Speaks was, I think I said this in the post note epilogue. I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. Having written your own memoir, you know exactly how soul bearing and challenging and frustrating and amazing it is. But yeah, I wrote Coincidence Speaks as a response to a promise that I made to myself back at the beginning of my 30s. I'm 44 now, and 44 years young. And back in my early 30s, I was living by all counts, a very normal, the normalest of all normal lives. I was striving to be the best normal person on the planet. But yeah, it's really an account of the decade of my 30s told in novel form. And to kind of answer your initial question, what was it like? The original draft was 128,000 words of pure garbage. And it was more memoir form. It was written, I tried to explore time from both a present tense, and would switch tenses intentionally within the different storylines. And it just came out as a total garbled mess that didn't make sense to anyone else, let alone probably myself at the time. So all the groundedness and the practicality aspects, it's definitely a work in progress. But since then, I revamped the entire 128,000 word count pile of steaming crap into um, a shorter. I turned it into a novel form, and I turned characters in my own life into, um, in the past tense, third dimensional, um, a typical novel. So I was like, what kind of a story would I want to read? Um, what would entertain me at the same time as, sharing some of the things that I went through. Um, but it came to the very last chapter, I think. I changed the genre. I was going to release it as autobiographical fiction or autofiction, and decided to call it what it is, which is creative nonfiction. Um, so all the events within the book um, are true to varying degrees, um, but much more true than I think some of the things that a reader would think were not true are. And what they might think to be true might be more just told within a storyline, within a linear framework to make it make sense within the novel. Anyways, lots of word salad from me. Just getting
No,
settled in here.
yeah, you have, it is very cool to hear you say that it's nonfiction because, or claim that it's nonfiction, because
Hmm.
there are some incredible moments of serendipity um, in this story that as a fiction piece, we would go, oh, fun, fantastical. And for us to now look at this and go, wow, you were being handed some pretty powerful medicine
Yeah,
in that decade of your
good
life that
word.
you're talking
Yeah.
about. um, so tell me a
Mm.
little bit more. Can you share, just for anybody that hasn't read Coincidence Speaks yet,
Hmm.
one of the more profound moments that felt like a real signpost in your journey?
Sure, absolutely. I'll begin with the start, which was um, in I just turned 30, and by all accounts, I'd been living a traditional middle class American life, complete with the Southern accent that I've that you remarked upon earlier before we started. I didn't realize it had gotten that profound. um, but I remember turning 30, and I was at my parents' house, and I believe it was my actual 30th birthday, and I had this wave of gratitude just crash through me that I'd never experienced before for my parents, for my life. I recognized the fact, even though I was a very busy, um, vice president of a bank, and I 3 years married with a young child, little girl named Elle, who was 2 years old at the time.
Mm,
No, she'd just been born at that time. Um, I just told my parents that I want you all to know I've lived an incredible 30 years. And if anything were to happen to me, it's not that I wouldn't care, but I want you both to know that I'm okay and I've lived an amazing life. And thank you all for that, which
wow.
was at that time in my life out of character for me. I wasn't in tune with my emotions, besides the day to day, I was reacting to life.
Hmm.
Um, and so unfortunately with that, for better or for worse, as soon as I acknowledged that and how grateful I was for how my life was to that point, everything just went haywire. Like
Wow.
everything from then on became this massive challenge where it was almost as if my life had said, okay, well, we're gonna show you a different side that you're not aware of. So I wasn't expecting for the gratitude to be number one, to show up like that, but also for that to be the response. Um, And the first major coincidence in my life that I recognized was about a year or so after that, when I'd been diagnosed with an unfixable neurological disease, which was reflex sympathetic dystrophy, otherwise known as complex regional pain syndrome.
Mhm.
And I went through the entire Western medical system. My wife was an acute care nurse practitioner, went through all the specialists, kings, men, horses, all those, the entire deal. Um, and was basically told that it was something that I was going to have to, um, just medicate at best.
Yeah.
So I was on a significant amount of painkillers, just to, get through the day.
Wow.
And it was, just to characterize reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's a chronic pain syndrome that manifests typically in one limb, like a leg or an arm or a hand. And it feels just like burning pain from the inside out.
Mhm.
um, and it got so bad at a certain point. I wasn't working. I couldn't walk. It was my right leg that was affected. And everything that I'd strive for just crumbled around me. And I was looking at a future of certainty, to be honest. I was certain that my future was going to be having this mystery condition spread to different parts of my body, which is already occurring. The burning had spread from my leg into my shoulder. And I just I started researching amputation, because I'm like, if I can't fix this, you know, I, I
Mhm.
I can't take this. The drugs aren't even helping at this point. Um, and I was totally, literally floored when I researched amputation for reflex sympathetic dystrophy, not being an option, because even in amputating my leg, uh, the pain signal would still be generated
Yeah.
through phantom limb pain.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was just done. That I couldn't fix it myself. The medical community couldn't fix it. I just curled up on a ball, like I was by myself in the middle of the day, the middle of the work day. Obviously I hadn't been working for a good bit at that time,
Yeah.
and just lost it. I mean, totally. That was a moment where it was worse than anything I could imagine. Just not for myself, but I saw my daughter growing up with a father that was completely, incapacitated, in extreme pain all the time, and withering away.
Mm.
And me being powerless to stop that. Um,
Oh.
so I was on the floor, and I can laugh now. It's a decade later, right? But um, I dragged myself up, and I popped some significant opioids and propped my leg up on the couch, and I tried to distract myself with just mindless TV channels. And the first channel that popped on was a documentary on none other than phantom limb pain and ways that amputees were healing themselves
Mm.
and having significant improvement through a lot of different modalities that I had no clue about. And that coincidence started me on the path of recognizing myself not just as a chemical reaction in a physical body, but also a bioelectrical being, and
Mm.
a also an energetic system, an energetic, correlated, connective, um, living creature like everything else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that, as terrible as it was, um, I being on the ground, I reached out to whatever concept of God that I had at the time. And there was,
Mhm.
bargaining and everything. Just take the pain away. I will do anything, anything,
Mm.
anything, anything. Just take it away. And I didn't, I didn't get it taken away. I got that crazy coincidence. I view it as a response to that. Like, it's not going to be taken away, but I'm going to show you what you can learn from it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
That's oh, you just reminded me of something someone said in the Unfixed docuseries, that had a version of extreme pain. It was facial pain. She said,
Trigeminal neuralgia.
well, actually different.
Mm,
Hers, I think it was morphine into that throughout
mm,
our work together, but we did have some trigeminal neuralgia as well.
mm-hmm,
But she ended up having like whole like facial reconstructive surgery to help. There was a lot of bone and
mm-hmm,
nerve interruption. Anyway, she said at the end of one of the episodes, I've learned to look at not what this has done to me, but what it's done for me.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I hear that in what you're saying, but that takes a tremendous amount of trust and openness for you even to see that documentary and have an ounce of like, wait a minute, let me look at this differently. Makes me think that, I mean, I know plenty of people that would have just been like, fuck you, this is just stupid, but
Mm,
something in you was
yeah,
really ready, right?
absolutely. I was actually to go from where I was on the hardwood floor to I was suddenly excited, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like not only that documentary seemed to respond, but it opened up this new line of questioning in my just opened up my mind. And every new question that I had was immediately answered by that documentary. Because my first skeptical question was like, okay, great. So you can do mirror therapy if you have one afflicted limb. What happens with somebody who has, like it's already spreading to my shoulder? What if it's whole body? And
Mm,
as that thought hit, the documentary shifted to show um, patients that were using software programs to immerse themselves in full body experiences
mm,
that allowed them to feel themselves as if they had four functioning limbs. And that was kind of when the light bulb really started going, where I was like, this is an inside job.
mm,
Um, and I was still thinking in terms of job at that point too. I was like, um, I it didn't feel like fixing at that point, but it
yeah.
felt like I'd been giving the tools to apply to create an environment where healing could then occur, if
Mm,
that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah.
And I know you get that having
Oh,
read your
yeah.
memoir, like, and having the work that you do. I'm like,
Yeah.
uh,
There is so much available to us when we do the inner work. And I'm not saying that it fixes,
mm-mm,
but to quote somebody else in the docuseries, they said, who actually did have trigeminal neuralgia, that she got to a certain point in her journey where she felt like her body didn't need to be healed because
mm,
her spirit had been healed.
oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh, yeah.
It's almost as if at a certain point, maybe the disease actually is that is the teaching,
Hmm.
like to show that the body is a part of us, but it's not us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't necessarily make any of it easier, but true
Hmm.
learning is seldom easy.
Yeah. Man, I am so glad that you were able to capture all of this so
Mm,
beautifully in your novel. I mean, it's a real gift, and I hope that there's ways that we can get this novel out there more, for
mm,
even send them to various pain hospitals around the country that are working at those higher levels of the maps in our brain that hold that pain, even if the limb is removed, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
um, so I know that writing became a really important part of your journey. Meanwhile, you were still banking. So I want to
Yes.
ask a little bit about, like, you were having this incredible awakening,
Yeah.
um, and pain simultaneously, and also running a household and bringing home the
Yeah.
bacon. So what happened? How did what where did that all go?
Well, it went after it was about after applying a lot of alternative techniques to rewire my nervous system. The pain, the signal gradually subsided until eventually there was one night where it suddenly had disappeared for good, and I knew it. I could actually feel like my leg again in the old way. Um, so, um, that that made me feel like Scrooge on Christmas. I mean, I wanted to tiny, like, just shout it out, like, and life was 100% brand new, new perspective. I had a second lease on it to go from, contemplating suicide, not being able, just based on not being able to handle it, to having the opportunity to live a normal life again. I mean, banking, wow, it was the best thing in the world. Everything was the best thing in the world for a good
Mm.
year or so after that. I just had such an enthusiasm for everything that I did because there was a natural gratitude permeating every single moment after having somehow come out the exact opposite side and not having to deal with the pain anymore. Um, and granted, there were certainly spots when, um, I sprained my ankle once and I had to do some rehab, but it was never again, never had the issue of reflex sympathetic dystrophy again. So, um, but with that enthusiasm and that energy came, um, life started speaking to me, or I started hearing it in ways that would just, it took me very much out of my traditionals. I was in a cookie cutter suburban house with a dog and a fence, and um, eventually um, moved out to the countryside, kind of like outside your window. Um,
Yeah.
and and so now I live a much quieter, um, and more reclusive life, which is hard, which is also why Substack has been so incredible, um, to connect,
Yes.
via electrical resonance with people all over the world. Um, but yeah, it was easy to start, and then it got very challenging after that as the next lesson presented
Yeah.
itself.
And so much so that eventually you decided to leave banking.
Yeah, um, I got to the point where, I was just naturally questioning everything, all the different things that I used to do. What kind of life do I really want to lead? What am I meant to be doing? Am I meant to be doing something?
Yeah.
Um, and I transitioned from living life from the outside in to being more aware of my inner world and how that is shaping everything that's happening externally. Anyway,
Mm.
so why not focus on the inner world? And in doing so, I could feel, my lack of resonance with banking as an industry.
Mm.
So I was I was bringing home the bacon, so to speak. I was the market executive for my hometown, actually, and we were successful to the point where I was being taken away from family, and I had this beautiful land that I never got to enjoy at all, and my son had been born, and I wasn't seeing them at all.
Mm.
So I started getting feelings and inklings that, you know, I had no idea what I was going to do after that.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to write a book at some point, but that was it, because that was just a promise that if I ever made it through, I was going to write some kind of book about it you know, in an effort to serve in some way, shape, or form.
Which
Um,
to the world and the archetypes that we
mm,
live by, um, many people would say that's the fool, and you've identified with the fool. And
yeah,
I mean, like, to leave your career, it's not anything that our culture really exalts, unless you already have something waiting for something
right,
else, you know? And
exactly.
I know I shared with you, my dad was
Yeah,
a heart surgeon, and he left his career, just up and left. And when he came back a year and a half later, he was basically like an intern underneath his other surgeons that were once his partners. I mean, he
right.
just really dove deep into the fool. And I want to explore that with you,
Hmm.
because when I say fool, this is not a negative thing. I mean, it can
Yeah,
have the low side, but
sure.
I love, you wrote to me, you said, the fool is who falls in love. The fool is who acts out new ideas in ignorance, willful or unconscious of the ramifications. The
Mm.
fool is who makes us laugh, and the fool is the part of us who sees things for the first time. The biggest pretense being how we all pretend that we are these busy, insignificant mammals screwing around, living unpatterned, haphazard lives filled with uncertainty and fear and doubt without greater meaning when we are in irreplaceable thread of the divine fabric of everything. The fool is who creates novel experience. I mean, that's just such a wonderful approach. So tell me a
Yeah.
little bit more about your relationship to this archetype.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it more to my attention too, Kimberly, because it's really helped me flesh out understanding, bring more self-awareness, and then understand the positive aspects of the Fool, and how it's really been a primary archetype for me throughout life. Um, from I can remember being a little boy, um, freezing up in class, trying to communicate on a science project, and not being able to get words out at all, and feeling complete shame because all of these kids in my class now saw me as someone that, like, couldn't hack it, couldn't do it. Um, but my relationship has changed so much to where um, I'd crystallized this life around me to protect myself from being the fool,
Mm,
up to probably age 30. And there's nothing wrong with the life that I was living. It's um, ignorance was bliss to a certain extent.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, it was definitely a foolish thing to step back from a career that was providing for not just myself, but also my wife, my two children. Um, and we're not independently wealthy by any stretch. This was not as if we had retirement funds hanging out. So there was a powerful financial risk to it as well. Um, but I started becoming just really disenchanted with just money as a concept, not as a
mm,
concept, but how money was being diverted or was channeled in a way that I saw within banking as just a fundamental hijacking of human creativity and power. And it there's nothing inherently wrong with money, but I just saw within the banking system how upfront and close up to um, how money in the position that it was in was set up to, um, yeah, as everyone knows, make the rich richer and the
yeah.
poor poorer. And
Yeah.
um, but to see it on a balance sheet and a P&L, and to understand how it works, not just at a local level, but a national level and an international level, a global level, was really it was very uh, crushing for me, because I was stuck between making ends meet for my family, providing a house and food, um, and doing something that I no longer believed in. And so
Mm,
it's a true fool would just jump without even thinking about the ramifications. And
mhm.
I've done that in the past with plenty of things. That's just how children learn anyways. But there's a responsibility as well when there's your own children and your own family, and balancing that and communicating where we are to our loved ones. That's been an ongoing challenge. Um, but it
The-
just got to the point where I had to, and
Yeah.
I'd love to share a story eventually about I was uh, I started to innovate from where I was, like
Mm,
just taking one step towards doing something different, um, and then just gradually those steps compounded until finally I was like, it's time. I know it's time. Coincidence spoke,
mhm.
and it's time to roll. So,
Yeah. I do want to hear that story. And I want to, I want to just reflect on something to me, and maybe you can validate or tell me I'm wrong, but it feels like to allow the fool archetype into your life also means that you have you are willing to trust the inner voice. You're
Mm.
willing to go into relationship with that inner voice. I don't think you can sort of work with the higher aspects of the Fool archetype without that trust. Am I?
You're 100% dead on or life on. Dude, with your, it's a spooky actually. The inner voice is exactly, um, I was at a banking retreat, and this is in the novel Coincidence Speaks. Verbatim, this is one of those things that's exactly detailed as it happened. Um, but I was at an upper management strategy retreat, third quarter, several years ago, and we were doing this team building exercise on a grass volleyball court. And so bank executives come out with boxes of water balloons for the the management employees to just chuck water balloons at one another on this court, I guess. And one of the women, in the process of throwing the water balloon, just chucked her family heirloom ring that was precious to her off of her finger and into the grass somewhere. And everybody just, she was very upset. And there were 20 different bankers combing through the grass on their hands and knees trying to find it for her. And for whatever reason, my all of a sudden the world just lit up from the inside out for me, and I became extremely just sensitive in general, and I could feel is a better word because I didn't hear it. It was more feeling, an inner voice that was like a compass that I could translate the feelings into words. It was close your eyes. So I'm now in a trust exercise. So I'd close my eyes around all my coworkers, and
Mhm.
then it was like, get down on your hands and knees and walk 7 feet this way. And then I'd pause and I'd wait, and I'd feel my inner compass speak again. And it would be like, turn 90 degrees to the right and go 10 steps. And I would go 10 crawling steps, and I'd go all with my eyes closed. And at this point, I'm feeling like a total idiot, right? Like I'm a fool among all my coworkers. And thank goodness they're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, so they don't see me just kind of. But it was a sequence of maybe 10 different directives that were just, it was a wild goose chase. I mean, doing circles. It made zero sense, but I was following the compass because I could feel in that moment. And it's not every moment that's like that. So when they
Yeah.
are that profound, it's much easier to trust. But it got to the point where my eyes are still closed. It's been at least 2 minutes of this wild goose chase with my eyes closed. And I get the feeling to, point my finger down into the grass and then open my eyes. And I do. And as my eyes readjust, it, damned if it's not pointing right at her ring. And it's under this clump of grass so deep. You wouldn't be able to find the thing for months of searching without a metal detector. So I couldn't, I mean, I'm just flabbergasted, right? Like it's a strategic business retreat, and here I am crawling around, like listening to an inner voice. and and I find this ring, and I'm just like, I'm totally tuned in, and I'm working hard just to not contain my joy or gratitude. Like, are you kidding me? So I walked back and I gave it back to the rightful owner, and I just, from the rest of the business retreat, was a complete daze. But I will say this, Kimberly, the moment that I saw that, the glinting of that ring, was like, that's when I knew I had to leave, and it was
Wow.
time.
Yeah. I mean, the affirmation that you were receiving from your inner slash outer universe is so
Yeah.
profound. I don't think many of us go through our lifetimes without such clear signals. I have a couple things. One, it reminds me of the remote viewers that the U.S.
Mm,
government hire. I mean, you might have a future career as a remote viewer because you basically, over Thanksgiving, I was sitting with somebody who does film work, and explores this phenomenon that
Mm-hmm.
is completely legitimate. And it's how I
Mm-hmm.
think we found Saddam Hussein,
Mm-hmm.
through a remote viewer. And,
Yeah.
and essentially, you just did that. You closed your eyes and you follow the coordinates.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you never had anything like this before in your life? Or did you have little moments where you feel like you're channeling things, even as a
I've
kid?
had definitely, I don't, a lot of my childhood from 7 and earlier is blocked out just because that's when we're most open. So, I know that there were experiences like that.
Mm.
Um, Nothing before or since that have been that. Um, I mean, that's like driving around a car with no gas, kind of, like at that
Yeah.
level of, um, so nothing very specific like that, but I do feel like life itself is or can be a real life treasure hunt. And
Mm.
I do feel led, by my own life,
Mhm.
in response to the questions that I hold, whether they're
Mm.
consciously asked or unconsciously asked. I feel that life is like an organic answering machine.
That's
And
such a cool way of putting it, that life is like a
yeah,
treasure hunt,
yeah, it is.
but
What
it's
else?
dependent on the questions that you ask. I mean, I
Mhm.
guess if people are listening and going, I want that,
Right.
what would you say to
I would
them?
say that we're always asking questions, and I'd say the majority of them are unspoken. A lot of
Mm.
the questions that we hold within, we might not even know that we're asking. We're just feeling them as an emotion. Um, so saying that life is a treasure hunt in no way, shape, or form is to say that it's it's just rainbows and puppy dogs, right?
Mhm.
But um, I think that if you take me as an example, when I hit 30, I I may have been expressing an intense gratitude for my life and my parents, but the unspoken question is like, is there more?
Mm.
And I wasn't asking it, but there was a part of me that was like, okay, well, if you're truly ready to say it's been 30 years and it's time to check out, or you'd be okay with that, like you feel like you're done, really, dude?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, but I do feel that, yeah, that we're always asking questions and that the outer world is a reflection of those questions being answered, unfolding in linear time, so we can actually, so we have the time to experience the answers,
Wow.
you know?
That is a very profound statement you just shared. I'm going to put that in bold when I go through
Aw,
the
cool.
transcript. Um, so you are, as we all are, you're saying we all are asking questions, um, and willing to live in the not knowing. You're listening to
Mm-hmm.
those questions and
Mm-hmm.
willing to live in the not knowing, and then listen to the answers that life is offering. Um, I want to know a little bit, how do you stay grounded in this living the not knowing? Because it can be liberating, but also really disorienting. Tell me what
Yeah.
sort of anchors you in this.
What's, um, I wouldn't call it a ritual, but what's really been coming up for me lately is frustration and anger, and even to the extent of rage at its extreme elements because of a lack or a resistance to, um, being in the unknown, which is where I am right now.
Mhm,
Um, and I think we all are to a very to varying degrees, to different extents at any given time.
mhm,
Um, and I do feel that life cycles, are there are human biological cycles to where you are in a reclusive or accumulative or a clearing space, and I'm definitely in one of those. But it doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah.
at all. Um, so what's really every time that I feel myself getting angry about something, um, I do a practice where I just bring my attention right here in the center of the chest. And that helps me um, obviously stop projecting anger outwards, but
Mhm.
it also allows me to not judge myself for being angry,
Right.
and to be okay with being frustrated, because that's obviously like I want to be I want change to occur, or I wouldn't feel
Mhm.
frustration.
Right.
So it's that balance of holding where I am and also a future aspect, a future me that hasn't materialized yet, a future world, future life, and how that interconnects with everyone else and everything else.
Mm.
Um, yeah, bringing awareness just into the middle of my chest. That's
Wow.
what I try to do right now. But there's been lots of different things over time, as I'm sure you
Yeah.
have as
But
well.
I like that it's in the middle of your chest. And for
Mm,
me, my interpretation of that and um, is the way that I hold my
mm,
anxiety, the disorientation I get from the physical symptoms of dizziness, all
mhm,
of that. The only way I've ever been able to work with it is through love
mhm.
and through kindness and allowing. Allowing is my word instead of accepting, because accepting feels a little bit more resigned.
Oh, Kimberly, I love that because I've been working to reframe acceptance and I've felt it, but that's the word. I mean,
Yeah.
allowing is the word. It's allowing it to be there, because
Yeah.
accepting, it doesn't mean that like, oh, I like it being here, or oh, it's all good, but
Mm-mm.
allowing it to be there is a great way to verbalize it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like
It's awesome.
the Rumi's poem, The Guest. It's like
Yes.
inviting him in. Come on, have tea. I might not like you, but
Yeah.
come on in. It reminds me, I just read yesterday, I don't know if you read Shy Guy Meets the Buddha. He's on Substack.
Don is it Boyvin or yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was just a short essay, but it was just perfect because he was talking about the assumptions he had of awakening and that someday
Hmm.
once he was awake, he wouldn't have all those aggressive feelings or angst or whatever. And now is realizing that no, the only thing that's different with awakening is that you allow those experiences to exist.
Perfect. Exactly. I read that and was thinking the same thing. Like, go Don.
Yeah. Go on.
Go on, Don.
Yeah. So you are absolutely living the question right now. And
Mm,
so, and I know that anger and that frustration of like, what's next
yeah.
is huge for all of us, but in particular, the creatives, that really want to feel like they can sink their teeth into something. And what surprised you most about
Mm.
yourself as you've kind of stepped into the unknown of your career life?
That personal anecdote that you shared about your father, and he came back and was, working as an intern, with the same people. Um, I've experienced that. Stepping away from my career in banking has unlocked the music in me, which was latent, and I didn't really know that I had. And it's another way that I can exercise or unleash the full archetype by being on stage and
Yeah.
performing either solo or part of a band, part of a duo with a really good friend. And I'll find myself like like on stage or a corporate event with people that I would work with at some point. And I actually was thinking, okay, so with what I'm making monetarily as I sit here and, you know, play this song that's impacting, that's enabling people to experience joy.
Yeah.
Like I'm making less than, I don't know, 10% of what I was in banking. But at the same time, um, what's occurring within that enclosed space of resonance with music and the connection between people there and the music that's coming through me is 100% priceless. And
Mhm.
there's no, and that's playing music has been the very first thing that I've ever been paid for that I've loved doing.
Wow.
And so that's one thing. Um, but it enabled me to finish writing Coincidence Speaks and to release
Yeah.
it on Substack and to do all these creative things that I would have never done in a million years because let's face it, like the corporate world, from an energetic standpoint, there's not enough bandwidth to truly immerse oneself in all of the different mental attachments that come with um, full-time career, and then also tap into your innate natural self. It becomes so I worked really hard. I went back into banking after I left for a year. I took a year sabbatical
Mm.
and I went back into it. um, this time at a much smaller bank. It was a rural bank, and um, the coincidence that led to this bank was even more insane than anything I'd experienced because probably to me it was on par with finding that ring at a bank strategy retreat.
Yeah.
The way I was guided to this next bank, and that's how my book ends,
I
pretty
remember
much.
that. I remember
So
that.
so I did. I don't want to give away too much for anyone out there that hasn't read, but I spent another 3.5 years at a new bank, working on setting up my own lives, my own boundaries, and merging all of the mystical aspects with the practical pieces of banking and um, putting it putting it together in a new way until it was time to leave for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was that somewhat fulfilling for you in those 3 years?
Yes. It the day I got back into banking was the day that the state shut down for the mysterious coronavirus.
Mm.
So I became an essential employee on April 1st, April Fool's Day.
No way. Oh man.
That's hilarious. Um,
Oh man.
uh, yeah. So I instead of the traditional banking that I was used to, it was all hands on deck. I'm at this tiny bank and we're trying to get funds on the street to help families and small businesses survive coronavirus. So that was the most rewarding time in my career financially, was through the payback protection program, the SBA. We put $85 million worth of funds out on the local streets for people and businesses to survive the coronavirus at the time.
Mhm.
Um, so that was I I was not expecting that either, right? I was just
Right.
thinking I'd been guided to go back to this bank, to this particular bank of all things. Um, and yeah, but after that first year and then another year, um, COVID became more endemic or endemic, how to pronounce it. It became more of getting back to the same old business as usual. And even though I was the top producer of my bank, um, a little bit before last year, I was shown the door because
Mhm.
I think it's because um, I didn't show the investment in the company because I wanted to carve out my own life and be independent. And
Yeah.
um, I probably wasn't a very good model for the other folks I was working with, um, you know, doing what I wanted within a corporate environment.
Mhm.
So I was shown the door, and that was another exercise. I'd never been fired or let go. I mean, it was called a restructuring, right? But this is
Yeah.
corporate speak for there's a
Yeah.
new team being brought in or whatever. So I remember walking out the front door of the bank. It was a shock. I wasn't expecting it. Thank you, life. um, but that was the first time when I was in the moment and I'd just been informed I was being let go and I had like zero severance. So at that point, I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this?
Wow.
Um, and I walked out the front door of that bank, and I had my awareness right here. And I knew that it was going to be challenging and scary, but this was going to unlock, you know, the next level of how I can, um, create and serve and do the things that will truly help,
Yep.
instead of moving money around.
Well, like you said, when you were 30,
Hmm.
the statement was gratitude, but the question was, is this it?
Is this all there is?
And
Yeah, I
it
didn't know I was
seems like,
asking the question.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know, that's for sure.
It seems like that question is continuing to
Hmm.
push you on
Yeah,
your path
yeah.
and open up new and thrilling and fascinating, um, dare I say, genius ways of seeing the world. So just, I'm glad that
Oh.
that question continues to move you forward. Um, I want to know what's the perfect convergence of all of this?
What's the coincidence of all these things that would result in a functional career, right? I don't have the answer yet. I'm living in that question. Um, but I do want to say that, again, I am so appreciative that you thought to invite me to have this conversation. And you are super tuned in. You have an uncanny knack to hone in on the exact words that are perfect to either stimulate new questions, new journeys, but multiple times in this conversation where I've been doing all the pip, 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 you hone in on the exact word that's perfect.
Hmm.
Whether it was, um, remote
Elaborate.
viewing. Remote
Hmm.
viewing was one where, um, the reason that I changed at the last minute the genre of my book from autobiographical fiction to creative nonfiction was because that day I just read a book called The Metaphysician by a gentleman named E.M. Nicolay, I believe, that was exactly like mine, told in a novel format, but from the first person. And he called it creative nonfiction. And the stuff that was in that book, Kimberly, was like, I mean, some extreme, um, like definitely remote viewing at a governmental level. Um,
Yeah.
and and since then, um, yeah, I think he subscribes to Coincidence Speaks Now.
Oh, no way. That
But
is so
so it's a
cool.
cool
I'm going to make
connection.
sure to tag him in the show notes too, so that he can,
Yeah,
yeah, circle
I don't know
back to
how
that.
active he is on the actual platform, but
Mhm.
I'd reached out to say that I read his book and found it, just really, amazing, and it was cool that that was what inspired me to change it to nonfiction,
Mm,
um, instead of fiction. But,
yeah,
um, yeah, the line's blurred. The line is always blurred.
yeah.
Um, and then, allowing was another one for you that was ideal. And then one that just escaped my mind that you literally just said, um, it'll come back to me at a
Yeah.
certain point. But, um,
We were
yeah, I
talking
think I
about the convergence
yeah, where does it all converge?
yeah.
Um, this is gonna be a bit weird, but, I've I have an image of how they converge. And, back to the concept of time flowing forwards and backwards, once in a while, I will have conversations with my future self. And there's a future self about 5 years from now that, is extremely that music is involved in this guy's life. And I saw specifically an outdoor venue, like kind of a stage, but not quite a stage. And I was part of a group of people. And I don't think I was a lead musician. I can't even say there were instruments, really. It was a strange thing. But there was an outdoor venue with probably 5,000 people, and I was part of a group. And what we were doing was creating this resonance um, through music, through sound,
Mm.
that was having a positive impact on the field, so to speak, on
Yeah.
the greater interconnected field. So I don't know specifically what that means, if that's even career wise, but that was a very, very clear image of
Huh.
where of a place that I'll be in 5 years. So
I have
conversing with my future self has been a good exercise to, because you can ask questions, those same
right.
questions, right?
Well, and as you've learned, you get answers.
Hmm.
I mean, it's okay.
If I'm
Part
ready
of
for
me
them.
thinks that you
If
have a grandmother, a deceased grandmother, just loves the hell out of you, and she's just like
Yeah,
whispering.
definitely. I
You
definitely have
know,
one of those.
do you?
Yes.
I mean, sometimes it's like, how does that happen to some of us? How do some people tune in like that, or channel, or understand, or trust? And maybe, my answer to that is that maybe there's an ancestor that's just like, I adore this person so much, and I'm just going to be their little guide, planting the treasure hunt notes so
Yeah.
that they can find them. But who knows what that is? But I do have two things, and I could just share this in an email later, but I'll just share it now. Have you heard of Damanhur?
Say again.
Damanhur, Damanhur. It's
It sounds familiar,
it's in
but
Italy. It's a
hmm.
thousands of people. Well, they're all over, but the main structure is in Italy. I lived there for 3 months, and it's a bizarre human experiment. But within that experiment, there are temples built under the earth where they perform. One of those things they perform is music, and
Mm.
it is solely to raise the vibration of
Hmm.
humanity. And it's pretty out there,
Hmm.
but it's also wildly awesome that some human beings have gathered to do this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And then the
Cool.
other
I'll
thought
check
I
it
had
out.
that's more
That's really cool.
practical is the silos. Have you heard of some of those music gatherings that are happening in silos around the country here?
I have
Um,
not.
yeah. Okay. So I've got some links to share with you. Um,
Cool.
but I want to go. I want to end with you on the music, because you've shared two very moving pieces, and I've read the comments. This is a really cool place you're taking your music talent, and the composition "Freebird Unfixed" was the first one that you shared, and it just beautifully captures the tension for me between opposites, the
Yeah.
freedom and the staying, the leaving and the acceptance. So tell me a little bit about this journey of
Mhm.
Freebird Unfixed and some of that kind of
Sure.
work that you're doing now.
I like that. Yeah, the reconciliation of opposites means allowing them both to exist simultaneously. And then with that allowingness, maybe they'll resolve themselves. But the understanding comes with that allowing, I find, eventually. With Freebird Unfixed, and that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I reached out to you because I'd written it back in May and I didn't want to impinge upon your namesake at all. But that was the name that had come towards it. It was a mashup of Coldplay's "Fix You" and "Freebird," of course, by Leonard Skinner, um, which hey suits my southern accent.
Totally.
There you go. Um, but yeah, I had just kind of been I've been thinking about different ways to use Substack as more of a full media platform. There's so much. I feel like there's so much more that we can do with Substack. And I love the writing aspect of it. And I think that I don't want to see that be compromised in any way. At the same time, I was like, well, how can ultimately I'm just sharing and expressing to try it, in an effort to connect, an effort to move um, in a positive way. And so Freebird Unfixed came as an idea. I was like, well, people, everybody knows Freebird, and lots of people know "Fix You" by Coldplay. And that's one of my favorite songs that has some personal aspects to me. So I could hear it mixed up in my head, and I knew that I wanted to record it. And the problem was that I had never recorded anything in my life. Um, but I had gotten my 13-year-old teenage daughter a Christmas gift of this like inexpensive laptop that was loaded up with some recording software that she'd never really used. Um, and so I just thought, again, full archetype, this is going to be easy. I'll just go ahead. I know how the song goes in my head. How hard can it be to just record it? I could just record each instrument one at a time. Um, but same thing as writing a novel. It was um, perfectionism kicks in, frustration, and finally, after about a month of putting it together and not being satisfied with the results, um, I tabled it. It was like, I'm never going to release this. It doesn't sound that good. But the cool part was that I brought my 13-year-old daughter into the recording with me. And so we did a duet together where she was singing the Coldplay parts of Fix You, and I was singing Freebird, which speaks to the elements that you're talking about between staying and going,
Yeah.
um, leaving and coming. And she, I, the father-daughter aspect of it, as after I recorded it, really struck me hard.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably when I started wanting to, when I was like, I want to send this to Kim. That's
Mm-hmm.
because how much I appreciate her work, and I think she'd appreciate it and resonate with it. Um, so that was my first one, my first song that I'd ever recorded, and my second song ever. I just released about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and it's another mashup of playing all the instruments and singing uh, "Learning to Fly" by Tom Petty, which is all about the full archetype. Ain't got wings. um, and then "Little Lion Man" by Mumford and Sons, which is all about courage and what happens when you're courageous at the start. And then look at you now, little lion man, you're not as brave as you were at the start. And I mixed those two up um, with my daughter as well, now 14-year-old daughter. Um, and in the process of thinking about just different things that I could do, an entire just catalog of songs, sounds. I
Wow.
don't want to say downloaded, but I could like hear them all the same way that I heard that ring being in a certain place. I could
Yeah.
hear this album of songs. So now I'm trying to ground them, and
Mm.
it's painstaking work, and I really don't like it. like I like I like the finished product. And the same thing with writing Coincidence Speaks. I really don't enjoy the writing process, and I really
Yeah.
didn't enjoy going through reflex sympathetic dystrophy. A lot of these things that I just don't enjoy are just the
Mm-hmm.
friction that results in polishing something enough to where it's then impactful and good enough. So
Yeah.
so that's the story behind the music. Hopefully we'll have an album out with my daughter, which is another fun thing. Recording
Yes.
with a 14-year-old teenager. Like,
Oh, I'm sure she just shows up in every way you want her to show up,
oh, it's the
whenever.
best. Like in her busy schedule, I mean, I'll have 30 minutes to lay down a track with her
Yeah.
and just creating the environment where she feels like she can, oh man,
But
it's a
what I
nice
mean,
dynamic.
yeah, looking back on this someday, the creative process of sharing this with your daughter
Yeah.
and finding that this listening that you keep fine tuning is now
Mm.
turning into music.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so beautiful.
That's what I keep telling myself in the unknown.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's gonna make ends meet.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can people listen to these? Are you sharing them publicly yet? Are you kind of holding them a little? I mean, obviously on Substack, but
Yeah. So eventually, I'd like to release them on Spotify.
hmm
I'm going to put together a YouTube channel. I might record video, like actual, like a music video with maybe my daughter singing with
yeah.
myself. I don't know. Um, but definitely I'll be releasing them on my Substack, Coincidence Speaks.
hmm
Um, And yeah, I'm very new to social media and the media world in general.
Hmm.
Substack's been my first entry into any kind of social media. So I have a limited knowledge as far as, how to get
Yeah.
these creations out into the wider public, you know?
Hmm.
So
Well,
I'm
this,
learning as I go there.
yeah, and I think this is a start, like a
Yeah,
sharing
thank you.
here, and then everybody that's listening, share. It just takes that one person,
Hmm.
that's looking for the next project, or hey, this duo here has something to offer. They're moved by it. I know
Yeah,
I'm moved by it,
thank you.
greatly,
Thank
and
you.
I'm moved by all of your work, and I'm I'm moved by your willingness to, that very moment after you watch that documentary, to, in the midst of your despair, crack open the window just a
Mm,
tiny, tiny bit and follow it. And
mm.
and you just keep following. And most people, I think that following needs to have a lot more tangible qualities within it. But I think you're just willing to go with it. That is such an inspiring path. So I know those that are listening today are going to feel that as well.
Thank you for seeing me that way. That's very, very, very much appreciated. I can't even tell you. Like, again, you have an unbelievable gift in seeing people and seeing
Mm,
in people what they don't see. So you're the one that's lighting up the unseen bridges, and
mm,
you're doing that with this very conversation. So
thank
I
you.
cannot thank you enough.
Well, when you need a pep talk, if you're waking up and you're feeling really frustrated, then you know how to call.
All right. All right. Well, I'll put you on speed dial. It'll be every day.
Okay.